My son said he was going to visit his father's grave. I thought it was just grief. But when I followed him, the groundskeeper grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't go there, you need to see what he's really doing." And that's when my heart froze. If you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. The apartment was still, except for the soft whirl of dust in the morning sunlight. Beams of light pierced through the heavy velvet drapes, highlighting every floating mote as if they had lives of their own. I watched them spin lazily, settling on the books that lined every shelf from floor to ceiling. These weren't just books, they were my late husband's legacy, a life of knowledge preserved in quiet, patient stacks. It had been 5 years since Kwame passed. 5 years marked by silence, memory, and the slow accumulation of dust. His desk still sat in the center of the living room, its dark mahogany surface reflecting a faint sheen under the morning light. His armchair was permanently indented from decades of work and thought. And my little corner, a small writing desk by the window, crowded with geranium pots, had been abandoned like a relic long untouched. The drawer with my old tools hadn't been opened in 30 years. The anniversary always moved slowly, like thick molasses dragging across the hours. I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table, feeling a cold I couldn't explain radiating from deep inside. Today I was waiting for them, my son Jabari and his wife Niara. They always visited on this day not for grief but for opportunity. The doorbell rang sharply, cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. "Ma," Jabari's voice echoed down the hallway, too loud, too cheerful. He entered, giving me a stiff, awkward hug, his expensive cologne masking something I couldn't name. Niara followed silently, her expression perfectly measured sorrow, eyes flicking immediately to the bookshelves, as if she was trying to memorize every detail. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, moving to the kitchen. "We could really use something stronger," Jabari replied, collapsing into his father's armchair. The chair seemed too big for him, as if he were trying to fit into a life that wasn't his. I poured tea in silence. I knew the next part by heart: complaints about unreliable business partners, shipments stuck at ports, and the vague import-export ventures that seemed to yield nothing but debt. "That container at Charleston $200,000 worth of merchandise," Niara said, her voice sharp with feigned desperation. "We need an emergency deposit or we lose everything." She looked at me directly, calculating. "Don't want to bother you today, Ma," Jabari added softly, as if showing delicacy. "But it's critical, we need financial help." Before, I might have felt pity, maybe guilt, but 5 years had burned all that away. Only dry, bitter ash remained. I looked at the 40-year-old man before me and didn't recognize the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed away so long ago. "I'll think about it, Jabari," I said quietly. "I need to check what I have." He pursed his lips, annoyed, while Niara gave a sharp, impatient glance. Their expectation was immediate consent, motherly love without limits. Suddenly, Jabari stood, moving to the window and clasping his hands behind his back like his father used to, but there was none of Kwame's stature in him, just a pale imitation. He turned, eyes wet. I knew this trick from childhood: a single tear could manipulate a mother's heart. 5 years, he whispered. 5 years since Pop left. "I'm going to the cemetery. I need to sit there alone and talk to him." Niara watched, pleased, while I allowed myself to believe, if only for a moment. Perhaps there was something human left in him. Perhaps the memory of his father wasn't just a word. "That's good, Jabari," I whispered. My voice trembled, betraying the hope that welled up inside me. He nodded, rushing out the door as if afraid I'd see through him. Niara lingered a moment longer, ensuring the effect. "Taking it hard, Miss Johnson," she purred. "He loved his father so much, just doesn't show it." I was left alone, the apartment silent except for the ticking clock. That small warmth inside me, the hope stirred, fragile and desperate. I needed to see it. To see my son at his father's grave, to feel for a moment that we were a family. I grabbed 3 deep red carnations, ones I'd bought for Kwame's portrait. I called a cab and instructed the driver to stop a street away so they wouldn't notice me. My heart pounded as I imagined hiding behind an oak tree, watching him, waiting for him to grieve in solitude. Pinage Cemetery greeted me with cool tranquility, the rustling of old trees and the faint decay of autumn leaves. I walked the familiar gravel path toward the family crypt, heart leaping with anticipation. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a man appeared, a tall, stooped figure in work clothes. Ephraim, the groundskeeper. I knew him from years past, a silent presence at the cemetery. But today his face was tense, grim, almost severe. He approached me, hand on my shoulder. "Miss Johnson," he whispered, "don't go to the crypt, not yet, you need to see what he's really doing." The words sank into me like ice water. The carnations in my hands felt foreign, lifeless. I nodded silently, following him down a barely visible, overgrown path. We reached a small hill, and through dense lilac branches I could see the family crypt, black granite, solemn and majestic. Ephraim stepped aside, giving me space. "You can see everything from here, they won't see you." My heart stopped. In less than 5 minutes, 2 figures appeared, Jabari and Niara. They weren't grieving. They weren't carrying flowers. They moved quickly, businesslike, to the crypt. Jabari produced a set of keys, unlocking the heavy door with a grinding sound that echoed through the silent cemetery. Inside, they were joined by a man in a long, dark coat. I couldn't see his face, only his figure, slick and unpleasant. Then I saw it. They were carrying objects, carefully wrapped in velvet, handing them to the stranger. "Flawless forgery," I caught him say. "A pro couldn't spot it." Jabari's pride in his deceitful work pierced me deeper than words. "The museum?" Niara asked, sharp with greed. "The director will swallow it whole," Jabari replied. In that instant, the warmth, the hope, the maternal love I had nurtured for 40 years vanished. In its place was cold clarity. They had turned Kwame's life work, his sacred collection, into a tool for crime. They weren't thieves, they were desecrators. I didn't cry, I couldn't. My heart was frozen in a crystalline block of sorrow and disbelief. They finished, locked the crypt, and left, not even pausing to leave a flower. I didn't speak to Ephraim. I nodded, walked away, caught a cab, and returned home in a haze, feeling as if I were inside a glass bell, the world outside moving while I remained suspended in cold, silent shock. Once inside the apartment, I approached my corner by the window, where my writing desk sat under years of dust. My finger traced the layers of neglect until I pulled out the deepest drawer, the one holding my old tools, my life before marriage, before motherhood, before grief. I opened the simple wooden box to find everything intact: the jeweler's loupe, the fine scalpel, the ultraviolet lamp, and beneath them, my carefully compiled reference books on historical pigments, binding techniques, and manuscripts. For 30 years, these tools had been unused. Today, at the cemetery, something died, and something else long buried stirred to life. I closed the box slowly, letting the cold clarity fill me. I wasn't planning revenge, just clarity, a reclaiming of myself, my knowledge, my authority. For the first time in years, I felt ready. Tomorrow, I would begin to clean, to organize, to plan. This small corner of mine would shine. And tomorrow, they would come again, and I would be waiting. The next morning, sunlight spilled into my small corner like a spotlight. The dust that had blanketed years of neglect glimmered briefly before I swept it away. For the first time in decades, I felt the sensation of control returning. My tools lay before me, familiar and sharp. My hands itched to touch them, to reclaim the life I had set aside. The memory of yesterday, the image of my son, my own flesh and blood, turning his father's grave into a den of deceit, was still vivid. I could feel it in my chest, not anger, not hatred, but the icy clarity of betrayal so complete that it left no room for sentiment. I had seen the man he had become. Jabari and Niara weren't just greedy, they were desecrators. They had weaponized my husband's memory for their gain. I spent the morning preparing quietly. My little corner by the window became my command post. I reviewed my reference books, flipped through notes on historical pigments and binding techniques, and reacquainted myself with the tools of my trade. Each object, each memory, was a reminder of competence, of authority, of a life lived beyond mere domesticity. Then the doorbell rang. Precisely at noon. My heartbeat didn't falter. I did not rush. I walked to the door in calm, measured steps as though the previous day's events were nothing but a minor inconvenience. Jabari and Niara entered without ceremony, their faces sharp and impatient. The false sorrow of yesterday was gone, replaced by greed and expectation. They had come for one purpose, the transfer of funds. "Wilma, did you think about it?" Jabari demanded, moving directly to his father's armchair. "Tea first." I replied calmly, gesturing to the kitchen. My voice was steady, neutral. They exchanged quick glances. Niara's expression hardened, Jabari's impatience was visible, his fingers drumming the armrest. They misread my calm for hesitation. They had no idea how dangerous that misjudgment would be. I moved with deliberate slowness. The porcelain cups clinked as I placed them on the table. I poured the tea, letting the steam rise between us like a silent curtain. Jabari cleared his throat. "We don't have time for this. We need an answer today. It's a large sum and the banks close soon." I took a slow sip of tea, letting the bitter warmth settle, then I spoke softly, almost casually. "Jabari, tell me about your business, specifically, rare books, manuscripts, not just import-export." He froze, his tapping fingers stilled. What do you mean?" he asked, confusion flickering across his face. "I mean, what exactly are you trading?" I continued, my voice calm, almost detached. "What objects are you moving and to whom?" The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Niara's pitying smile never reached her eyes. She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine in a cold, calculated gesture. "Ms. Johnson," she purred, "you don't need to worry about details you can't understand. Leave it to us." I did not flinch. I did not withdraw my hand. I let the silence stretch. I let the weight of their expectations settle over them, heavy and uncomfortable. "You miscalculate," I said quietly. "I understand more than you think, and I know exactly what you did at the cemetery yesterday." Jabari's face went pale. Niara's smile vanished. The air seemed to thicken. For the first time, they understood that their certainty, so carefully cultivated over years of manipulation, was no longer absolute. What are you talking about?" Jabari stammered, trying to regain composure. I leaned forward slightly. "You think I wouldn't see? You think I wouldn't know that my husband's crypt was turned into a storage for stolen artifacts? That the trust you claim to honor was violated the moment you brought your first bundle to that man in the coat?" Their eyes widened. The confidence they wore like armor yesterday had cracked. They glanced at each other, panic rising just beneath the surface. Niara's voice was sharp now, strained. "Wilma." "That's not what you think. We can explain." "There is nothing to explain," I interrupted, calm, firm. "You desecrated a grave, you desecrated the memory of a man you claim to honor, and you did it for money." Jabari's jaw tightened. We were careful, nobody knows, it's not theft, it's logistics." I let a single, icy smile form. "Logistics, yes, you would call it that, but I saw everything. Every movement, every whisper, every bundle, and I've been preparing." "Because while you thought I was weak, passive, distracted by grief, I've been reacquainting myself with the one thing that no amount of deceit can overcome: knowledge." They stared at me, eyes darting, unsure of the extent of my understanding. That uncertainty was the first crack in their confidence. "I know about pigments, about manuscripts, about the intricacies of rare books. I know which copies are authentic and which are forgeries. And you, my son, have just made a very dangerous mistake. You underestimated me. A tense silence fell. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. Their greed and condescension, once so sharp, now appeared fragile. They had relied on my assumed ignorance. That assumption was shattered. Jabari tried to recover, leaning forward. You can't prove anything. Even if you saw us, it doesn't mean. It means everything, I cut in. I know what you were transporting. I know where it came from. And I know exactly what I can do with that knowledge. Niara's hands trembled slightly, betraying the composure she had maintained so carefully. Wilma, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted again. And you will understand that from now on, nothing happens without my oversight. Every movement, every transaction, every artifact passes through me, or it does not happen at all. They exchanged panicked glances. The realization hit. They had been dealt a hand they hadn't anticipated. Their arrogance, their certainty had blinded them. Now they were exposed not just to me, but to the consequences of their actions. I sat back, sipping the tea I had poured, letting the words linger in the air like a heavy fog. My corner by the window, my tools, my knowledge, they were my weapons. And the battlefield was clear. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. The tension was palpable. I had not yet moved to action, but the message was clear. The old woman they had underestimated was no longer blind. For the first time in decades, I felt power, not from wealth or influence, but from clarity, from knowledge, from the cold, crystalline certainty that comes from seeing betrayal for what it truly is. Jabari swallowed hard. Niara's lips pressed into a thin line. They realized that the game they had played for years, manipulating, deceiving, exploiting, was over. And they had no idea what I would do next. I did not rush. I did not shout. I simply watched them squirm under the weight of their own misjudgment. The calm that settled over me was not mercy, it was the quiet prelude to action. And in that silence I began to plan. Tomorrow I would visit the archives, examine the manuscripts, study the forgeries they had trafficked. I would uncover their network, their accomplices, their lies. I would move deliberately, invisibly, with precision that only decades of careful, meticulous study could provide. For now, I simply waited. The tools on my desk gleamed faintly in the sunlight, as if acknowledging my resolve. The past 5 years of grief, of loss, of neglect, all of it had been preparation. And now it was time to reclaim what was mine. Because betrayal, no matter how clever, always leaves traces. And I knew how to read them. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I had not felt in decades. The cold, crystalline sorrow that had settled over me the day before had hardened into something usable, purpose. The betrayal I had witnessed was not just a wound, it was a spark, igniting a meticulous plan that had been forming silently in the background for years. I did not rush. I did not act impulsively. Instead, I returned to my corner by the window, sitting at my desk with the jeweler's loupe in my hand, the ultraviolet lamp beside me, the set of tweezers and scalpels arranged neatly on the desk. I opened the reference books I had brought out the day before, flipping through pages on historical pigments, binding techniques, and rare manuscripts. Every detail was important. Every subtlety mattered. Jabari and Niara believed they had manipulated me once. But they had underestimated the depth of my knowledge and the precision of my mind. They had turned my grief into opportunity, but they would not turn my expertise into weakness. By noon, they arrived, their movements brisk and businesslike. They no longer attempted the false sorrow or manufactured grief. Their faces were sharp, expectant, and impatient. "Wilma, have you thought about it?" Jabari demanded immediately, stepping into the living room. I poured tea with slow, deliberate motions. "Of course," I said softly. "But first, tell me exactly what items you've handled and where they are now." Jabari froze. Niara's eyes narrowed. This was not what they had expected. You can't know, Jabari said, his voice strained. I know enough, I replied calmly. And I know how to verify authenticity. Every manuscript, every document you've trafficked passes through my hands from now on, or it does not leave this apartment. Niara tried to intervene. Wilma, we can explain. I do not want explanations, I said. I want compliance. You will show me everything. Their confidence faltered. They realized that their carefully crafted manipulations had failed. They were exposed and they knew it. I led them to my corner by the window. These are my tools, I said, lifting the jeweler's loop. This is the ultraviolet lamp. These are the reference books that contain decades of knowledge. And this is my mind, which has seen everything you've done. Jabari's lips pressed into a thin line. You can't. I can, I interrupted. And I will. You will show me every item, every transaction, every accomplice. Because if you don't, I will report it and you will lose everything. And more than that, you will lose the trust you never deserved. Niara's eyes flickered with fear. Jabari clenched his fists, but there was no outburst, no immediate retaliation. They were cornered not by brute force, but by precision and intellect. I watched them squirm under the weight of their own arrogance. They had treated me as invisible, passive, senile, but I was neither. I was an expert, a witness, and a force they had never considered. Over the next hours, I examined the manuscripts they had trafficked. Each forgery was easily detectable under my scrutiny. Pigments, paper, binding techniques, all betrayed their attempts at deception. I documented everything meticulously, preparing a record that would expose them completely if necessary. And I did not stop there. I traced their network, identified the museum contacts, the intermediaries, the accomplices. Every detail, every movement was catalogued, every lie exposed. Jabari and Niara watched in stunned silence as I worked. Their faces betrayed the realization that they were no longer in control. Power they had wielded for years, manipulating family and memory, was now in my hands. You see, I said finally, looking up at them, your certainty was your weakness. You assumed I was blind, passive, compliant. You assumed grief had rendered me weak. You were wrong, completely wrong. Niara attempted one last plea. Wilma, we were only trying to profit from your own father's memory. I interrupted, voice calm but sharp as steel. No, that is unforgivable, and it will not continue. Jabari opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Do not speak. Listen instead. You will comply. You will bring every artifact to me. You will show the records of every transaction. And you will leave the cemetery intact as it was meant to be, or you will answer to the authorities. And I assure you, I know enough to make your story unravel completely. They looked at me, the realization of their vulnerability clear. The arrogance that had carried them for years now crumbled in the face of calm, precise authority. The weeks that followed were methodical. I worked quietly, verifying each manuscript, tracing every document, exposing every forgery. Jabari and Niara attempted small maneuvers, half-hearted attempts to regain control, but I anticipated them. Each lie, each evasion was met with quiet observation and a corrective plan. Slowly, inexorably, the balance of power shifted completely. By the end of the month, the truth was undeniable. The authorities were involved, not through my emotional reaction, but through meticulous documentation and expert testimony. Jabari and Niara's schemes unraveled. Their greed, their manipulation, their desecration of their father's memory, all exposed. They were stripped of the illusions of power they had built so carefully over the years. And I reclaimed more than just control over the manuscripts. I reclaimed my agency, my expertise, my dignity. My corner by the window became a sanctuary, a place where memory and knowledge could coexist without deceit. The dust that once signaled neglect now became a reminder of vigilance. I visited the cemetery alone one morning, carrying fresh flowers, not to witness deceit, but to honor memory. Kwame's crypt was silent, intact, dignified. I placed the flowers carefully, paying homage not just to him, but to the truth and the integrity he had valued above all else. The warmth I had once felt, fragile and fleeting, had returned, not as naive hope but as calm certainty. I had been betrayed, yes. I had watched the desecration of the life I cherished. But in its aftermath I had found strength, clarity, and the knowledge that no deceit, no matter how clever, could outmatch wisdom tempered by patience and experience. Jabari and Niara would never recover their former arrogance. Their lessons were painful but necessary. And as I left the cemetery, the morning sun glinting off the granite, I understood that some betrayals are blessings in disguise. They force clarity, focus, and the awakening of power long buried beneath grief and trust. I returned home, my corner by the window now fully arranged. The tools gleamed, the reference books were open, and my mind was clear. The past 5 years of silence, grief, and patience had led to this moment, a moment of truth, of reclamation, of quiet victory. The doorbell rang. I smiled, not out of pleasure, but because I was ready. I had nothing to fear, nothing to hide, and everything to protect. The storm had passed, leaving only clarity and control in its wake. And I knew, finally, that the life I had set aside for others could now belong entirely to me.